For nearly a century, NFL front offices have operated under an unwritten rule of complete narrative dominance. When a player steps into a franchise facility, they enter an ecosystem engineered to maintain corporate leverage. Front offices do not just control depth charts, snap counts, and contract extensions. They control the flow of information surrounding every victory, every injury, and every locker room disagreement. Through carefully cultivated relationships with beat reporters, national insiders, and league-approved media outlets, team executives have long used strategic leaks as a precise tool for athlete management. If a quarterback asks for a record-breaking contract extension, a convenient leak emerges questioning his leadership in high-pressure situations. If a starter gets benched, the official story is packaged, framed, and delivered to the public long before the player ever sits down at a press conference podium. This information monopoly has allowed billionaire owners and general managers to dictate public perception, protect institutional authority, and systematically suppress player leverage during critical negotiations. That entire playbook relies on a single vulnerability: the player's total dependence on traditional media to reach the public. For decades, if an athlete wanted to defend their reputation, tell their side of a story, or dispute a team narrative, they had to go through the very journalists who depended on front office access for their livelihoods. The playing field was fundamentally rigged toward institutional power. Shedeur Sanders enters the NFL by completely shattering that dynamic. Long before taking his first snap under professional center, Sanders built a self-sustaining, multi-million follower digital infrastructure that operates entirely independent of traditional sports media networks. He does not need a local beat writer to air his thoughts, nor does he require a Sunday morning pregame show to set the record straight after a tough loss or a contentious team decision. Through his personal media channels, direct-to-consumer content networks, and massive built-in social audience, Shedeur holds something no rookie quarterback in NFL history has ever possessed: direct, unfiltered, and immediate access to the public. This infrastructural autonomy strikes at the core of how NFL franchises discipline and restrict their rosters. Standard PR channels are built to handle standard players, athletes who can be fined, disciplined, or muted through team-controlled media availability and stern corporate warnings. But you cannot discipline a player into narrative silence when that player owns the distribution network. If a front office attempts to leak a negative story to an insider to soften public support during contract discussions, Shedeur can publish a direct response to millions of engaged fans within minutes, bypassing every gatekeeper in sports journalism. The strategic value of the front office leak disappears the moment the target possesses a larger, more engaged platform than the insider carrying the team's water. What makes this shift so terrifying to NFL executives is not simply that Shedeur Sanders has a large social media following, but that his media ecosystem is structurally leak-proof and financially self-sustained. Front offices are accustomed to dealing with modern athletes who post highlights on Instagram or launch occasional podcasts. Those traditional athlete media ventures are almost always reactive or defensive, functioning as side projects rather than fully integrated operations. Shedeur's setup, inherited and refined from the operational blueprint established by his father, operates as a non-stop, daily narrative engine. It generates its own revenue, commands its own production value, and controls its own framing in real time. When an athlete operates with that level of media autonomy, the traditional hierarchy of the NFL facility fractures. Coaches and general managers are used to being the ultimate authority on what information leaves the building. They dictate when injuries are disclosed, how roster battles are explained to the fan base, and who takes the blame when a season begins to derail. With Shedeur, the front office loses its monopoly on the room. They are suddenly forced to coexist with a parallel media apparatus capable of challenging their framing instantly, directly, and without corporate sanction. This is the true threat Shedeur Sanders poses to institutional power in the NFL. It is not about off-field noise, branding distractions, or flash. It is about leverage. For the first time, an NFL team is drafting a quarterback who possesses the technological and audience power to turn the narrative tables on the organization itself. Front offices are no longer just evaluating a prospect's arm strength, pre-snap reads, or pocket movement. They are staring down the barrel of an athlete who cannot be controlled through traditional public relations, cannot be silenced by league gatekeepers, and refuses to yield the narrative to the institution. The foundational blueprint for Shedeur Sanders' unprecedented media autonomy was not created overnight in an NFL pre-draft training facility. It was painstakingly constructed, tested, and scaled across two distinct college football landscapes under the direct guidance of Deion Sanders. When Coach Prime took the head coaching position at Jackson State University, he did not simply bring a high-profile name to an HBCU program. He brought an in-house media production engine designed to bypass traditional sports coverage entirely. At Jackson State, and later elevated to a national obsession at the University of Colorado, the Sanders family systematically proved that an athletic program could build its own direct-to-consumer distribution network. Through daily vlogs, behind-the-scenes documentary series, and continuous social media output, they transformed routine locker room speeches, practice reps, and team meetings into high-engagement media assets. Shedeur was not merely a passive subject within this ecosystem, he was its focal point, learning the operational mechanics of audience capture, brand monetization, and real-time narrative management while developing as an elite quarterback prospect. By the time Shedeur stepped onto the field in Boulder, the Deion framework had evolved from a novelty into a formidable media conglomerate. Every week, millions of viewers tuned in, not just to Saturday television broadcasts on major networks, but to the daily unfiltered digital broadcasts produced by the Sanders family's media arm. This created an unprecedented structural inversion. The player and his inner circle commanded a larger, more devoted direct audience than the university's official athletic communications department. Shedeur inherited this exact operational blueprint, assimilating the technical infrastructure, content pacing, and audience loyalty necessary to run a media empire alongside a Division I football schedule. He learned early that direct audience access is the ultimate form of insurance against external narrative distortion. When applied to the rigid, highly controlled environment of the NFL, this framework represents a seismic shock to traditional operational dynamics. NFL front offices are built on strict hierarchies where the team holds absolute leverage in almost every personnel scenario. If a veteran quarterback underperforms, a general manager can initiate a subtle media campaign through trusted beat writers to prepare the fan base for a benching, framing the move as a necessary step for team discipline or tactical evolution. If a contract dispute arises, the front office can leak details of the player's financial demands, casting the athlete as greedy or uncommitted to winning a championship. The player, lacking a direct platform of equal scale, is typically forced to absorb the public backlash or rely on canned agent statements that rarely shift public sentiment. Shedeur's direct audience access entirely neutralizes this structural advantage. With millions of highly engaged, fiercely loyal followers across multiple platforms, Shedeur possesses a digital megaphone that rivals or exceeds the reach of most NFL franchises. If a front office attempts to frame a benching, a tactical disagreement, or a contract negotiation in a light favorable to the institution, Shedeur can publish his own perspective directly to his audience within moments. His followers do not process the situation through the lens of local newspaper beat writers or national studio analysts. They process it through the lens of the player himself. This direct line of communication strips the front office of its ability to shape public opinion in a vacuum, forcing executives to consider how every roster decision, public statement and private critique will be received when met with an immediate, equal, and opposite media counterstrike. Furthermore, this infrastructural autonomy radically alters the math during high-stakes roster and contract discussions. In the modern NFL, front offices use public relations as a form of non-monetary leverage. By controlling the narrative, a team can put pressure on a player to take a team-friendly deal, restructure a contract, or accept a reduced role without causing a fan revolt. Shedeur's media ecosystem renders those tactics ineffective because his financial and reputational stability is not solely dependent on the franchise's approval. His brand generates independent revenue and sustains immense cultural capital completely separate from his NFL playbook. By bringing the Deion framework into an NFL locker room, Shedeur forces general managers to confront a reality they have spent decades avoiding: an athlete who owns the pipeline of his own story. For front offices accustomed to absolute authority, managing a quarterback who possesses independent media infrastructure is not just a tactical hurdle, it is a fundamental challenge to how NFL power is brokered. The modern NFL media ecosystem relies on a mutually beneficial transaction between team executives and beat reporters, a quiet economy of information exchange that keeps institutional power firmly in place. To understand why front offices fear player media autonomy, one must first understand how leaks function as a strategic weapon. Beat writers and national insiders depend heavily on front office access for breaking news, draft targets, and injury updates. In exchange for this lifeblood of scoops, reporters often serve as the unspoken delivery mechanism for the franchise's preferred narratives. When a team wants to push back against a star player's contract demands, a trusted insider suddenly tweets about the player's character concerns or locker room friction. When an executive wants to soften the blow of a controversial trade, leaks emerge detailing the athlete's poor work ethic behind closed doors. This pipeline allows front offices to smear, pressure, or control players while maintaining plausible deniability, using third-party journalism as a shield. Shedeur Sanders acts as a circuit breaker in this traditional information loop. When a player possesses independent media infrastructure, the strategic value of the front office leak collapses almost instantly. Historically, when a negative story broke, an athlete had to wait until mandatory post-practice media availability to respond. By that time, the team's narrative had already spent 24 hours dominating sports talk radio, cable debate shows, and social media feeds, leaving the player permanently playing defense. Shedeur eliminates that delayed reaction window entirely. If a front office leak attempts to frame a practice disagreement, a physical recovery timeline, or a tactical dispute in a way that protects the institution at his expense, Shedeur does not have to wait for a press conference or issue a watered-down statement through a publicist. He can address his millions of followers directly on his own channels within minutes. With a single video post, live stream, or podcast drop, he can present raw footage, provide his context, and flip the public discourse before the team-favored leak even finishes trending. The moment an athlete can reach the end consumer faster, clearer, and with more engagement than the beat reporter pushing the front office's narrative, the team's information monopoly dies. This real-time response capability creates a massive deterrent for team executives who rely on media maneuvering to discipline players. Front offices suddenly find themselves in a position where leaking a story carries far more risk than reward. In the past, leaking a negative report about a quarterback's film study habits was a low-cost method to gain leverage in contract talks. Against Shedeur, that same leak triggers an immediate, unfiltered counter-narrative delivered directly to an audience larger than that of the beat writer who published the original story. The front office no longer controls the narrative arc. Instead, they risk getting exposed in real time by a player who has the tools, the confidence, and the platform to dismantle institutional spin. Ultimately, Shedeur's media infrastructure renders his personal narrative leak-proof because it strips beat reporters of their power as narrative gatekeepers. When a player does not need traditional journalists to build his brand, defend his reputation, or communicate with fans, those journalists lose their leverage over him. They can no longer threaten negative coverage to force cooperation, nor can front offices use them to wage proxy wars in the press. Shedeur's setup proves that direct audience access is the ultimate countermeasure to front office manipulation, effectively disarming one of the most potent tools NFL franchises have used for decades to keep star players under institutional control. The pushback against athlete media autonomy is rarely loud or direct. It operates through the subtle, weaponized vocabulary of the pre-draft evaluation process. As Shedeur Sanders prepared for the NFL, national draft analysts, talent evaluators, and league insiders began deploying a familiar set of code words designed to protect the status quo. Labels like uncontrollable, arrogant, and a locker room distraction began circulating through national television segments and anonymous front office quotes. In the traditional NFL ecosystem, these terms are strategic tools used to suppress draft stock, lower financial expectations, and force young prospects to fall in line before they ever sign an official contract. When evaluators called Shedeur a distraction, they were not referring to missed team meetings, off-field legal trouble, or a poor work ethic. His on-field production, relentless work rate, and elite mental toughness under constant pressure at Colorado were fully documented. Instead, the distraction was his refusal to hand his public identity over to the institution. To a traditional NFL general manager, a player who maintains an independent media infrastructure is inherently risky because they represent an entity the team cannot fully govern. If a player's primary communication pipeline is controlled by his own production team rather than the franchise's public relations department, the front office views that player as an unpredictable variable inside their ecosystem. The weaponization of draft season narratives became the league's first line of defense to punish an athlete who dared to bypass their established gatekeepers. This pushback exposes a fundamental rift between traditional NFL governance and a modern generation of athletes who view themselves as self-contained media enterprises. For decades, front offices evaluated prospects strictly on physical traits, film study, and their willingness to assimilate into a corporate football culture. The ideal prospect was compliant, quiet, and dependent on the team for exposure and validation. Shedeur's arrival forced evaluators to confront a model where a rookie enters the building with a larger, more engaged personal brand than the team itself. Rather than adapting to this shifting landscape, many front offices defaulted to resistance, attempting to treat digital autonomy as a character flaw rather than an operational asset. Yet, behind closed doors, a quiet realization is spreading through executive suites across the league. The traditional franchise model is rapidly losing its friction. General managers may publicly complain about off-field noise, but they are privately coming to terms with the reality that Shedeur Sanders is not an isolated anomaly. He is the blueprint for the future modern athlete. The modern sports economy rewards direct-to-consumer access, personal audience ownership, and real-time narrative control. As college football athletes continue to build massive personal platforms through NIL infrastructure, the draft-eligible prospects of tomorrow will increasingly look like Shedeur, entering professional sports with established digital media companies already attached to their names. NFL front offices are now being forced into an uncomfortable evolution. They can either continue attempting to suppress athlete media autonomy through outdated draft season propaganda, or they can adapt their institutional strategies to collaborate with players who hold independent power. The teams that insist on total information control will find themselves locked in constant, exhausting PR battles with their own marquee talent. Conversely, forward-thinking franchises will recognize that a quarterback with a massive, highly engaged direct audience brings unprecedented commercial, cultural, and brand value into the building. The reaction to Shedeur Sanders is not just about a single draft evaluation. It is the opening chapter of the NFL's painful transition into an era where athletes no longer need the league to tell their stories. The final analysis of Shedeur Sanders' media model ultimately forces a critical question upon every modern sports franchise. Is an athlete's independent media power a net positive or a structural threat to a team's championship window? For traditional front offices, the answer has long been rooted in fear. Executives have spent decades convincing themselves that absolute organizational control is a prerequisite for winning Super Bowls. They argue that outside media apparatuses create unnecessary noise, splinter locker room unity, and distract from the singular focus required to survive an NFL season. In their view, every minute spent producing content, managing personal platforms, or controlling narratives is a minute stolen from film study and physical recovery. However, that perspective relies on an outdated premise that player autonomy and championship football are mutually exclusive. In reality, a quarterback who possesses an independent, highly engaged media platform offers a franchise unprecedented strategic advantages. When a team's centerpiece player controls his own narrative, the franchise itself becomes far less vulnerable to external media panics, speculative reporting, and manufactured team controversies. In high-stakes sports markets, local radio outrage and national media cycles often force insecure front offices into reactionary personnel moves, premature coaching firings, and hasty quarterback benches. An athlete with a direct line to millions of fans acts as a stabilizing force, absorbing external pressure, clarifying contexts immediately, and shielding the team's internal culture from outside manipulation. Furthermore, Shedeur's model fundamentally redefines the financial and cultural dynamics of a championship window. A franchise built around a quarterback with massive independent media reach instantly becomes a global focal point, commanding premium primetime exposure, elite free agent interest, and unmatched commercial leverage. The media ecosystem surrounding Shedeur does not drain energy from the football product. It amplifies every victory, multiplies every brand partnership, and transforms a regional franchise into an international property. The modern NFL landscape is no longer driven purely by standard corporate sponsorships. It is driven by cultural relevance and direct consumer engagement. A general manager who knows how to collaborate with a media sovereign quarterback can leverage that cultural capital to build a dominant, future-proof organization. Ultimately, Shedeur Sanders' model represents the ultimate stress test for traditional NFL organizational hierarchy. His presence in the league forces a permanent shift from an era of institutional dominance to an era of collaborative power. Front offices can no longer expect elite athletes to hand over their voices, their brands, and their narrative autonomy as a condition of employment. The franchises that survive and thrive in this new landscape will be those willing to dismantle their rigid top-down control structures and learn to coexist with players who act as independent media enterprises. Shedeur Sanders is not just playing quarterback in the NFL. He is proving that the modern athlete can build, control, and protect his own legacy without asking for permission from the institution. The traditional playbook of information control, strategic leaks, and manufactured leverage has finally met its match. NFL front offices may still be terrified of what this shift represents, but the shift is already here. The power dynamic in professional sports has officially changed, and there is no turning back.